Hey, I'm Ash.
And I'm Callie.
And welcome to Paved with Gold, the eating disorder recovery podcast. I would like to acknowledge the traditional landowners on which Callie and I are recording and extend the same respect to the traditional custodians of the lands from which you are all listening. If you have listened to our show before, you know that unless we're talking about people's individual lived experiences, we don't tend to focus on specific types of eating disorders. And there's a reason for that. We feel like each and every type of eating disorder is just as serious as the next one. And people's eating disorders do tend to morph and change over time. And we also think that the strict diagnostic criteria tends to do more harm than it does good. So we just talk about eating disorders as a whole. And we tend to, more broadly and as an all-encompassing term. Despite this, today we wanted to talk about binging. If you have an eating disorder or had an eating disorder, it is likely that you may have engaged in binging behavior at one point or another. It's a behavior that is very common, and it's a very common response to restriction a lot of the time, but there is so much more to unpack about it, which is why we needed to bring in someone who not only had a lived experience with it, but someone who has the expertise to help us unpack this topic. So today's guest is an eating disorder credentialed practicing dietitian who specializes in non-dieting. Yay, we love that. Essential. She is the founder of Sweet Spot Health. She's also a fellow podcaster at We Don't Know Yet Pod, link in the description below. And she's very also cool just like so friggin' gorgeous and pretty. Like her face it's almost like offensive. She's that pretty. So it is a great pleasure to welcome to the pod, Maddi Parsons. Hello.
Hello, what an intro. Oh gosh. That was very sweet of you to say welcome me. Hi guys.
Hi.
Welcome me. I love that. I remember somebody when we did the intro and then they were like, wow, yay me.
I think as well, from, normally I'm kind of in your position doing the podcasting and doing the hosting so it's hard to chop and change.
Exactly.
It's such a confronting thing sometimes when you're being introduced and it's like, oh, fuck, you make me sound incredible. Wow.
Yeah, it's an imposter syndrome just seeping in. I'm like, did I do all those things?
Again, the regular theme on this podcast is just aggressive compliments. So
we do very aggressive complimenting.
We are nothing if not consistent. So
I love that. I'm definitely going to take that term as well.
Oh yeah. We're very get ready for very aggressive complimenting.
Yeah, I'll brace myself.
So as we always do, we'd love to hear your story and your experience with eating disorders, sharing as much or as little as you feel comfortable, because we feel that we know that lived experience is at the heart of this podcast. So please tell us in your own words where this all started for you.
Yeah. And look, before I sort of begin, I really do love that one of your core values as a podcast and both of you as, professionals in this space is not to, I guess, marry too closely to any diagnoses, because I definitely have that similar value as well, because while it's helpful, so many people fall between the cracks. So yeah, I'm a big fan. Look, I guess for me, my journey definitely started back in my early teens. I struggled a lot with disordered eating. Full disclosure, I actually never got a professional diagnosis. I never sought out professional help because there was so much stigma and shame around my behaviors, but it was something that lasted with me for the better half of 10 years. So it was definitely something that I experienced, day in, day out, and had a really big toll on my mental, physical, and emotional health. Kind of started, I guess, as unfortunately most people's does, with, trying to get quote unquote healthy, really restrictive dieting, thinking it's super normal. And then that led into some pretty unhealthy behaviors around food and exercise as well.
Yeah. It's amazing how normal it is actually, in terms of dieting is the normal thing to do. And unfortunately, when we talk about what's normal, about what's most common, it is normal to just want to go on those health kicks. I mean, that's how mine started. And it morphs into something that is so the complete antithesis of health so quickly.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And even looking back, I had a moment once I was recovered and very much through all that, I almost got a little bit angry. I was like, why didn't the people around me notice? But looking back, it was so normalized. Everyone was doing it. It doesn't mean at all that it was okay, but it was the norm.
Yeah.
And I feel like it, and I always kind of talk about like the coping mechanism component of an eating disorder as well, right? And, or disordered eating. And I think it's really interesting, and kind of like it often starts with this health kick or wanting to, get healthy or go on a diet, or, my peers are doing this. But I find it really interesting to watch the process that happens when it kind of becomes a coping mechanism. Perhaps everyone around you is doing it. So it's like, well, that's how I fit in, or that's how I relate to people, or that's how I might show people, like you just said, you're kind of angry that people didn't pick up on it. Well, like they should have picked up on it, because you were trying to, like, essentially, like we talk about sometimes, we hear this, it's just attention seeking. Well, so what if it is? Because, like, why is this person seeking attention? Like, that's a really important component.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. And the more upskilling that I've done in this area is particularly around neurodivergence. So I actually got diagnosed with ADHD at the beginning of last year. And it kind of just makes sense. I know it's actually just like the best thing ever. I love it. I wear it very proudly. But like even looking back, I'm like, I definitely struggled throughout my whole schooling life with like fitting in and making friends, and always just feeling like I was a little bit odd, a little bit like the odd one out. So it kind of like knowing that now, it does make sense that I engage in these behaviors to fit in.
Absolutely. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, absolutely. That masking is really hard to do day in, day out, especially in a schooling environment. And I think it's really scary to consider how many people are doing that and then leaning on coping mechanisms, like maladaptive coping mechanisms, to get through that experience. Because and even now, into, I don't know, just the outside world is not built for neurodivergence. So it's just a bit concerning. But anyway, Ash, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to ask in terms of, because you say that, you finally, did recover. What was sort of the turning point for you in terms of, because you did say that you never got a proper diagnosis. Were you able to, did you seek any kind of treatment, or did you reach out to anybody? What was the steps in terms of you sort of making your way out of your illness?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, because like, as I said, like definitely looking back, although as a dietitian, I legally can't diagnose, knowing sort of what the red flags are, I'm like, I wouldn't be surprised if I actually did seek out treatment and support, or diagnosis rather, back then. It would have been something. Look, thinking about my own journey, it was something, I guess I kind of had this distinctive moment of like, it was a bit of a breakdown, to be honest. I was like, I can't fucking live like this anymore. Like, I'm sick of food just being this all-consuming thing. I'm sick of feeling so self-conscious and so hyper-aware of my appearance and what I'm eating. Like, I just can't do it anymore. I actually was at the time, sounds a little bit messed up. It's actually at the time doing my undergrad, so my Bachelor of Nutrition Science. I feel like a lot of nutrition and dietetic students.
Very common, right?
Yeah. I was like, oh, healthy eating, like la 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 la, amazing.
Yeah, we had Kia from
Embody.
Yeah, from Embody. Yeah, and she said kind of the same thing. She was saying, I actually, it was a real sort of part of my eating disorder while I was studying to be a dietitian, and that there is quite a few, I don't want to say red flags, but maybe amber flags in that space. Would you say?
I think red flags is probably a good color flag to use.
Oh, absolutely. And even like the more that you learn about health and nutrition and nutrients throughout that degree, not at all shaming the degree. I think it's wonderful, but it is really fostering much more of a black and white view around food, which is kind of just solidifying everything that I already thought about food anyway. Yeah. Yeah, so I did that. And then in my final year of my undergrad, I actually went on exchange. So I went over to England to study the final 6 months of my degree. And I think that was probably the biggest turning point looking back. Like, I was alone, which normally I guess would have been, or I can, like looking back, I guess I can understand how it could have turned the other way. But for me, thank God, it turned the more positive direction. I was poor, so I couldn't really afford fruits and veggies. I kind of just lived off like a lot of carbs and pasta, which was something that I had demonized myself in the past. And I think through all of that, I was just like, I'm seeing the world, I'm seeing some amazing places. I'm experiencing some awesome things in my life that I haven't done ever, ever. Like, what's the point? No one actually gives a crap what I look like here. Like, people just want to know who I am as a person, and can I engage in a good conversation? Can I have a laugh? Like, am I, someone that they want to be around, and they don't actually give a shit politely what I look like?
100%. You nailed it. Like,
100%.
Literally no one does.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, look, I guess in a long-winded way, that was definitely a bit of a turning point, or the turning point for me. When I did come back to Australia, I then, thank God, sought out some psychological support, and I've been in therapy ever since. It didn't necessarily start out with like, I guess, support around the disordered behaviors, but more, I guess, what the disordered behaviors were covering, or they were being used for to mask, like a coping mechanism. Yeah. So I have a fair bit of trauma in my life, and look, obviously, I'm not going to dive into that. Well, I don't feel really comfortable diving into all of
Of
that
course. Yeah,
today,
of course.
but yeah. But looking back, I think, yeah, that was definitely a big element. So by working on that stuff, I guess I kind of came to a place now where I'm feeling good.
Yeah.
Awesome.
It's like, I don't actually need an eating disorder to cope with this stuff anymore, do you? Like, it's such a lovely spot to reach. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like neurodivergent masking meets, childhood trauma. It's just like a perfect storm, really.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Can I ask, in terms of becoming a dietitian, what was the process there for you wanting to step into, I guess, the eating disorder speciality?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And that is something I've often asked. So when I was doing my undergrad, I was working at a gym, again, another red flag.
Amazing.
But yes, but towards, I guess, the end of that, I was very much in a good place around food and my body image and all that sort of stuff. But a lot of the clientele that were coming to me were definitely meeting the criteria for disordered eating or an ED. I, at the time, was obviously by no means qualified to see them, so I often had to refer on. But I just found it was something I was so insanely passionate about. So my lived experience, plus getting to meet these people, hearing their struggles, and really wanting to help them, kind of just led to me wanting to go back to uni, doing my master's, and niching down into this area, which I did straight off the back of uni. So it was something I was a bit on the fence about at the start, but it's the best thing I've ever done.
Awesome.
Oh, incredible.
Well, we are very glad that you have gone down this path, because it means that you are
Oh,
just such an activist in this space. You have, we've always said that lived experience should be at the heart of all treatment, and having people as practitioners treating people who are going through the same
really
thing,
helps
it
that.
makes
Helps
the
that.
biggest difference.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And even hearing horror stories from some clients of they're like having treating team members who just don't get it or don't understand. And look, I'm sure that's something that you've heard with similar colleagues or guests on the pod. It's just, yeah, it's horrible.
Yeah. You shouldn't be re-traumatized. You shouldn't be traumatized by your eating
Yeah.
disorder treatment.
No, absolutely. It should not be creating trauma, and it shouldn't be something that Say and I really like, is that treatment should be done with you, not done to you. And I think like that's such a common narrative in this space, and it's something that I know I try and make sure that I practice by every single day. It's something I try and remember every single day, and I just love connecting with other people in like professionals in this area that kind of had the same ethos, because unfortunately it's not across the board, and so sometimes I'm kind of like, you got to band together with the people that like do practice in that way. So it's really nice to hear your experience and to see you step into that space so beautifully.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I started out by myself, and then the back end of last year, we rebranded to Sweet Spot Health, which is what it is now. We expanded our team, so I've now got two dietitians. They're amazing. One of them actually also has a lived experience, which is really, really cool and something that we're big about. But the whole, I guess, underpinning of our rebranding is dietetics. What I found is traditionally really clinical, really stale and sterile, and we just want to bring in that human element. We want to bring in that, like, hey, we actually get what you're going through. We're here to support you and be by your side. We're not going to tell you what to do, obviously, unless it's absolutely necessary. But we want to empower you to make those changes.
Yeah, I love it. And you would just
Yep.
see such incredible, like, better results with that kind of ethos, right? Can I ask, with Sweet Spot Health, and I know that if anybody follows you on Instagram, they might be able to see a lot of what you share on Instagram. But I know you do a lot of speciality, like kind of what's the word? Specialities within the eating disorder space. Can you tell us a little bit about your interest areas and where you love working and what you're really passionate about?
Yeah, definitely. Look, I think around eating disorders, and sorry, I'm just going to clarify. Do you mean as in like behaviors in the ED space?
Just kind of like, I mean, yes, or, just in general as well. Like if there's any kind, like obviously, like I said, we're kind of gearing towards the binge eating kind of stuff, but like just in general. Yeah.
Yeah, look, I'm just a massive fangirl for that whole non-diet or intuitive eating approach. I think it's like the bee's knees. I'm actually about to put out a post. Like, as dietitians, we are very, very heavily regulated about what we can and can't sort of plug on social media or just in general. And like, I just say to my clients, I'm like, the fact that I am saying with the utmost certainty that intuitive eating is like the best thing when it's appropriate to do so for you to do around food and body, like, means that it's so heavily substantiated by credible evidence.
Yeah, incredible.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah, so that's kind of like where my passion point lies. I always say to clients, I guess it depends where they're at with their recovery journey. I guess we always find it really important to have that discussion of like, if you're wanting to, this is a really great end goal, but we need to do X, Y, Z to get to that point.
Cool. Amazing. Yeah, because it's very, I find sometimes a lot of people do jump straight into this like intuitive eating goal. And I know, like, personally for myself, I don't know, I don't think I identify with intuitive eating as such. It's more kind of like Callie's style of eating, I suppose, which I guess is kind of like intuitive eating, right? But as a neurodivergent, it is like, it doesn't look like the classic intuitive eating. So I think and I guess why I'm saying this is I think in this space sometimes hear the term intuitive eating and it kind of is like this very cookie cutter, like this is what it is. And I'm just wondering your thoughts around that, because for me, I'm like, well, like I said, I do my style of eating, which I guess is kind of intuitive eating, but it's not the classic intuitive eating. So I guess unpacking that a little bit, right?
Yeah, look, and I definitely agree with you. I think our whole thing is like, we do intuitive eating principles, but we blend it in with our own personal approach. Like, as with any other treatment model, right? I'm not the biggest fan of being super manualized. I don't think that's helpful. I think everybody's so different. So I think taking a blend of things is the best way to go. So, and as a fellow neurodivergent, like, sometimes I'm going to forget to eat. Like, it's not going to be all intuitive every single day. So what we try to do is, like, we have the bones there, we have that loose structure, but we empower our clients to like tweak it best suited to them.
Yeah, I love
Client-centered care, everybody.
that.
Clinicians, take notes.
Stuff it. We love it.
We love it. So to get into sort of the crux of the topic
Yes.
of binging, I'd first like you to tell us what is a binge, for like, in terms of like, what's the actual definition? Because I think a lot of people would be like, oh, I just had a full plate of food on like a meal, like what would be considered a very normal portion, and feel like, oh no, I've binged those. So it's kind of, what is a binge, first of all? And then also, can you dive into what causes us to binge? I know that's two very separate questions, but one might lead into another.
No, absolutely. So, like, by definition, and again, I think I want to preface this by saying everybody's experience is different. It doesn't have to be this like definition. You don't have to, I guess, align yourself with the definition, but just for simplicity's sake,
Yeah.
a binge is characterized by eating. Well, there's actually two types of binges. I feel like I'm so scattered. Definitely about ADHD.
Go for it. No, I'm 100% following.
Yeah. This is,
I love that. Oh,
we're coming along for the ride with you. It's all good.
Yeah, no, I'm 100% following so far, so it's all good.
Yeah.
I love it. I've got clients with ADHD too, and they'll always stop themselves
It's the
halfway and go,
best.
sorry. I'm like, I've been with you this whole
No,
way.
I'm following and I love it as well, because I'm like, I go on these tangents all the time, and I'll stop sometimes exactly the same. Like, I'm so sorry. Like, no, I'm with you. Like, keep going. I see how this all links
100%.
together.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. So, like, I always start with saying, there's two typically main types of binges, right? We've got our subjective binges and we've got our objective binges. I feel like I'm double thinking this because I always get them mixed up. A subjective binge is kind of that stock standard, I guess, stereotypical binge, right? It's a large volume of food eaten within a pretty short amount of time, and really that sense of loss of control, like almost like an out of body experience almost. On the other end, we've got like an objective binge. So the person might feel really out of control, really like they're not able to stop themselves even though they want to, but it doesn't necessarily have to be like, quote unquote, a large volume of food. I always say to clients, like, you could feel out of control around eating a carrot, and technically it could still be classified as a binge.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes total sense.
Yeah. So, but again, like, I guess most people do align themselves with that subjective type, and what is a large amount definitely varies person to person, but I guess it would be more than what you would normally have within a given, meal or sitting and eating period. In terms of the main triggers, that was the second part of the question.
Yes.
Hey. Yeah, cool. The main triggers, I guess, for my brain, and because I do have a tendency to ramble, which you guys are seeing now, I always explain it to my clients by breaking it up into three main parts. So I'm like, okay, we've got triggers for binges. There's a plethora of them, but let's try and categorize them under three main umbrellas so that we can, I guess, make it easier. So we've got like physical restriction of food. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the amount, but it can also be foods or food groups if you're not eating enough food or if you're depriving yourself of a certain nutrient. We've got that psychological or that mental restriction. So that can be rules or restrictions around food, that whole, good, bad, black and white view around food, which can drive up those urges or that urgency to binge. And then we've got emotional regulation. So using food to cope or to soothe with something else going on in life.
Yep. That makes total sense. And I actually really love the way you explain that.
Yeah. Same.
I followed every tiny little bit.
Yeah.
This makes sense in my head.
I just like breaking things down because there are, under those umbrellas, there are 1,000,001 different, experiences that someone might go through, but it's just easier.
Yeah.
And I think without getting into, again, want to stay away from diagnoses because I feel like that can be a whole nother topic. I feel like that's a really loaded topic, but I feel like it's for a lot of people, I won't say most people, for a lot of people, I feel like those explanations are really something that would align with a lot of people, especially through this recovery process, because we know that there are so many different elements throughout the recovery process that will feel like I'm really out of control around food when, it may be they're just starting the recovery process, and then they might then morph into, I feel really, I'm eating a lot of food because I just feel hungry all the time. And I know that can be such a distressing point for so many people. And I think the way you've explained that just explained that perfectly as well. And then, I really like the way you explained that because I feel like it can align with just so many people and it kind of covers most people, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And look, everyone's, there might be people that fall between the cracks as there are with everything, but typically it's one of those. And I love what you said about the recovery as well. Often that sense or that fear of binging can be really common in the early stages of recovery, which I think it is really important. Once the emotions subside, to kind of sit down, either whether it's by yourself or with your treating team, and unpack it and look at was it actually a binge or were you just giving yourself an adequate amount of food?
Yeah. And even that process, and I think we spoke about it not long ago, Ash, the sort of middle process where it's I feel like I'm just so hungry all the time and it's I just want food. Again, can be super distressing. And I remember it like it was yesterday, just what is wrong with me? I have to stop this. This is a problem. And I always remember my team being Callie, your body is just needing it right now because you have been in a deficit for such a long time. Your body is just, and then that stage of it's wanting to store it just in case it goes into a famine again. It's really, and I just remember that them explaining that to me. It didn't really make it easier, but I always just been being loaded with that knowledge. So then it can be okay, explain it to myself every single time that feeling comes up. Such a distressing time for so many people.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Bodies are just so smart. They are so smart and they just want to get back to it, this sort of neutral state of, so if there's anything distressing that's going on in the body, it will automatically try and compensate. And if it's saying, you've deprived me of food for so long, I need more, keep coming, keep going. It's such a natural, it's your body's indicator. It's an indicator for your body that, things haven't been right for a really long time and it's just trying to correct itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always I use humor, obviously where appropriate, with my clients to just explore that. I kind of go oh, doesn't it suck? Your body wants to take care of you and keep you safe. And we always have a bit of a laugh.
Yeah. Of course, that's quite specific to people who have sort of restrictive intake when these when this sort of natural hunger is a result of restriction. So don't want to overgeneralize there.
No.
But one thing that I definitely want to talk about is, and this is, if you'll indulge me for a second, if I'll talk about my personal experience with binging. I've been recovered for quite a while now, probably I would say about 5 years, about that.
Yeah.
And I still remember certain binges like they were yesterday. I can feel it. I'm taken back to that exact moment where I was, what time it was, what I was doing. And I don't know if it's a trauma response, but it definitely feels like it. And for me, those sort of moments were really, really traumatic. And I think because of that loss of control, and I think, unfortunately, the massive stigma and shame that comes with binging and the behavior that it's just sort of cast out, like, no, you have to be perfect. Like it's this horrific, almost very ingrained in anti-fat bias, right? Of this gluttony and this this image of like, oh, it's the fat person who can't stop eating. It's like it's a horrific stereotype and
Or God
horrific
forbid, what if
stigma.
I gain 10 kilos overnight? That kind of stuff. And it's like, well,
It's
God forbid,
yeah, exactly. And it's just,
Yeah.
I think that the stigma and shame of binging is is a core part of why a lot of people don't talk about it. It is absolutely a barrier for people getting help and for talking about their lived experience with it. So I was wondering if you could break that sort of feelings of shame down and how we can actually reduce the stigma of binging. I don't know if that's a question you can answer, but
How you might do that with your clients, I guess.
yeah.
Look, I always, with my clients, I do share. I'm pretty transparent about my own personal experiences, and I will always put my hand up and say, like, I've got thin privilege, particularly when working with people in larger bodies, because I guess in the early days of us building rapport, if it's appropriate and if it sort of comes up in conversation, I'll be like, look, I used to struggle with what you're struggling with. Like, I get it. And I can almost see them kind of looking at me being like, how are we the same? Like, how have you gone through that? You know what I mean? When we are so markedly different in our body weight and shape and size. And that's, I think, really important. And look, it's taken me a lot of time to get confident in that conversation, for one. It feels icky. But I'm like, you don't have to be, living in a larger body to experience those binges, right? It can happen across the weight spectrum or across the body shape and size spectrum. It's unfortunately very heavily associated with people living in larger bodies, but it definitely doesn't have to be the case.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Does
absolutely.
that answer your question?
Yeah. I think it absolutely does. And I think also figuring out why we binge is such a core part of breaking that stigma down as well, which we've gone into.
Yes.
Because I think it's like, for me, my binges were absolutely a result of restriction, on both the restriction of actual calories and restriction of specific types of food. And so I could understand why it was just the feeling of shame afterwards, and the inability to stop, and how am I, like, the next day of like, what have I done, in like the thoughts of that. It was just it's such a hard cycle to break, because then it would just trigger a whole nother round of restriction after that. So I guess my next question is, how do we break the binging cycle? I know it seems like once you kind of go into this whole spiral of, oh, well, I've just binged, okay, now I just need to completely cut my intake, if that's relevant for you, of course. And like, I just need to, now I need to compensate, or those kind of things. Like, how do we actually break that cycle? And I know it's hard, so if you can say it in a much more eloquent way, that would be great.
Oh gosh, I'll try. Yeah, and look, I think it feeds nicely into what you were just saying earlier as well, which I didn't really, I guess, give my full answer to in hindsight. I always, once we have sort of discussions around the stigmas and I guess the level of shame that people experience, because it is so hard. You're exactly right. I often, like, I have a little whiteboard. I'm a very visual person, neurodivergent.
Love it.
I draw up like the three main trigger, I guess, umbrellas that I just was speaking about earlier. So the physical, the psychological, the emotional regulation. I literally have that conversation with a client. I explain it to them. I'm like, what ones do you think you might be falling under? And then it's almost like a light bulb moment. They're like, oh, like, 1, 2, and 3, or, 2 and 3, or 1 and 1, whatever. Like, it can be a combination, right? But by sort of explaining it almost like the science behind it, right? It can really take away that shame and stigma. They're like, okay, I'm not defective. Like, this is happening because of these reasons. So I guess to segue then into like how you break out of that cycle, it is very hard. I think it comes, or it feeds back into nicely. I feel like I'm doing all these little loops into like, I don't always feel like it's appropriate to jump straight into intuitive eating, because if someone's been in that binge restrict cycle for so long, telling them to trust their body, it's just like, it's not going to work. It's going to feel really hard and even be like more harmful than beneficial, right? So I always kind of draw it out. I'm like, look, we can talk about like, what you'd like to get out of sessions. If you didn't have any ideas, like here are some things that I think could be helpful. Like number one is having that really regular and adequate eating pattern. I always say that's like the foundation, right? So once we're, eating regularly and eating adequately, unfortunately, that also means sometimes even if you've binge, not restricting, sorry, going straight back into eating, that's going to rebuild that trust in your body that it's not in that famine state. It's not having to, have so much urgency towards food. And then we can always build on it from there. So once that foundation's laid, then it might be, and I get obviously everyone's different. It might be exploring like their personal rules and trigger foods and restrictions, obviously in a very systematic and processed way. Like we're not just saying eat all the foods, like have a go. I often do it like once they've gotten to a place of really regular and adequate eating, and they've also equipped themselves with like a bit of a toolkit if that urge to binge does arise. So then once I guess the rules and restrictions around food are gone, so foods are taken off their metaphorical pedestals, if someone is engaging in binging behaviors as like a means of emotional regulation, that's often when I'd be like, I guess, referring them on to a psychologist and being like, oh, look, I think this is really something great to chat with your psychologist. But are there any things that you can do, on the surface level? Let's say one of your triggers is stress. Is there anything else you can do to help manage stress to try and break that cycle? I think a multidisciplinary team obviously is like really, really crucial in this.
Yeah, 100%.
Absolutely.
One thing I love that you were talking about was this building trust back with your body. And I think it's so important. And it's the one thing that sort of rings true, I think, especially when you're talking about back at what we were saying about our biological need to get back to sort of a stable space. And like your body's, if you just keep going in that cycle, your body's not going to trust you. So I guess one of the things that my dietitian told me was, if you have a binge, the most important thing that you can do is to go right back to normal eating right afterwards, because your body will then say, okay, that was just a blip. As long as you're not going to restart that cycle, and sometimes it takes a few goes to do that, but your body will thank you for the extra food. It will sort itself out. It will do what it needs to do with that extra food. But the main thing is building trust back with your body. And I think, that's such a
kind of
critical
brain
point.
and body trust.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just that really solid foundation that you do need to lie in. Unfortunately, sometimes it might mean, still being or still experiencing binges, but as you said, like jumping straight back into eating afterwards, and it does sort itself out.
Yeah.
Can I ask with that? And I don't know, this is a bit of a left field question, I think, but I was just thinking as you explaining that, like how hard that must feel for, I guess, particular people, especially those in fat bodies. And I know that you mentioned, how you kind of relate, or not relate, but I guess work with those who are in fat body and, acknowledging your thin privilege. Can I ask, with that kind of process, is that process any like different when you work with clients in fat bodies, or is it kind of like, I don't know, because I think I was just thinking like that brain body trust, like building that trust back up. I just can only imagine how much harder that would feel when it's like the world outside is also like hounding down on you as well. And I think I was just like, oh gosh, that must be so incredibly difficult. Does that kind of process stay the same, or do you kind of like shift your approach there, or what does that kind of look like?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think it's an important one to have as well, right? I'm just trying to think about my approach and how it would change. Look,
Sorry for the left field question.
No, that's so fine. Look, approach-wise, it probably doesn't change too much, aside from perhaps if they are wanting to maybe explore some gentle movement, trying to support them in that, obviously in a healthy way, but still explaining like the more that you pursue weight loss right now, the harder it's going to be essentially for you. And I really empathize and sit in that discomfort with them as much as I can, and, you know, talk about how they can do that if they're having a particularly hard day.
Yeah.
But the risks are much the same. Like, you know, whether you're in a larger body or a smaller body, the risks are very much the same.
Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah,
I say to
100%.
clients, I'll full go like the advocacy role if you want me to, because unfortunately a lot of them have been stigmatized from the medical industry. Like,
Yeah.
I unfortunately have had a lot of referrals for weight loss, and then you know, do some chatting with a client and figure out like it's much deeper than that. And yeah, just really like empathizing with them and being like, look, while we don't have similar experiences, I can't imagine what you're going through. Like, it would be so difficult. I'm here to support you. Like, how can we make this more comfortable?
Really
Yeah.
validating. Yeah, listening
Yeah.
and validating that feeling. Yeah, love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was we were chatting with Ellen Masson on their Into the Red Zone podcast, and Ellen described it as, you know, you can have two people pushing this sort of giant boulder up a hill. It's the same boulder, it's the same size, it's the same weight, but the difference for someone with a thin body is they can push that boulder up a hill without any resistance from the other side. If it's a fat person and who's pushing that boulder up a hill, or someone who's not straight sized, it's almost like someone's pushing the rock back down, like against you. And I think, it's to come back to that.
Such a great analogy. Yeah.
It is. It's great.
Yeah, that's great. I love that.
Yeah. And I think it's acknowledging that resistance is there, but also it comes back to that trust and safety that you need to find in your body. And while everyone else is trying to make your body unsafe for you, you need to work hard to build that trust and safety within your body to, you know, do what it needs to do to keep you safe. And unfortunately, it's so much easier said than done, obviously.
I was gonna say, yeah.
Yeah. And me saying this, just do that. And it's like, okay, shut up, Ash. But it's more of, I think it just comes back to that trust, like trust in your body, because everyone is is an expert in their own body, and doing whatever you need to build that trust back and to create that safety, I think is such an important thing. I want to get a little bit technical, if that's all right. And I want to sort of break down what happens to our bodies and our brains when we are binging, because I think there is that feeling, oh, I'm totally out of control, and oh, I feel terrible, and like, you know, some people's like, oh, I'm eating so much that I felt like I was going to explode, I was going to die. Those are extremely, you know, powerful feelings and very extreme feelings that I think people go through both mentally and physically. But I think it would be interesting to unpack what actually is happening in those moments on a biological level.
Yeah, no, it's great. And look, to be completely transparent, the whole neurobiological process, I'm not 100% across, but I do know, obviously, like a surface level understanding of it all. I guess from a psychological or a neurological perspective, I feel like everybody's experiences is going to be different, right? Like, if they're using food as like a bit of a coping mechanism, it could even, you know, lead to a bit of a state of dissociation, just to sort of check out of the world and use food to cope in that. From a biological perspective, obviously, when we are eating more food than our body wants to take in at one given time, it's going to put it under a bit of pressure. It's going to put it under a little bit of stress. So what you often find, and not always, everybody's experience is different, but from a biological perspective, if somebody has been in that binging cycle for quite a while, they might have elevated blood sugar levels or insulin resistance or higher cholesterol levels. Like, I've received a lot of referrals for all of the above, and you kind of do some chatting with a client and uncover that, you know, it's not necessarily like the types of food that they're eating. It's just the fact that they are in that binging cycle, that their body is almost going into like this stress state.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, so we spoke to Dr. Ash Alami like a while back, and he was sort of saying about how like one of the biggest risk factors, right, for chronic disease is actually these, I guess, weight cycling kind of, you know, these cycles. And I guess you can kind of almost put like this binge restrict in the same kind of category, right? Like, I can only imagine the pressure that's putting on the body, and then to go back into restriction and like, you know, that's also pressure on the body. And like, I guess it's that's kind of the factors to consider when we're looking at chronic disease and, disease management and stuff like that. That explains it really well. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess as an extension of that as well, if you are using food as a bit of a coping mechanism, or you're engaging in binging behaviors to cope, or a bit of emotional regulation, I always explain like neural pathways to clients. So really drawing it out, I'm like, when you're feeling a certain way, your brain has now connected this almost like road in like a forest or a national park or whatever to this certain behavior to feel better. And that's by no other means other than just to keep you safe. Like it's a protective thing in its eyes.
Yeah, makes sense.
The act of us exploring other, activities or other coping strategies is to form these other new neural pathways. And it doesn't mean that you're not going to ever use this one, but the less that you go down that road, the, more overgrown that path becomes almost.
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of links with that trauma you were sort of mentioning earlier, Ash, as well. It absolutely can be traumatic. I just wanted to ask as well, because I know that we spoke about, like, we're speaking about, I guess, like that binge restrict kind of cycle. But I know when you were explaining kind of binges a little bit earlier, and we sort of touched on it again, I don't want to like just focus on that. But that period of, if you do have a restrictive eating disorder, and that period of, I guess, feeling like you're binging because your body just wants a lot of food. I just wondered if we could touch on that a little bit in this kind of conversational way as well, because I'm wondering, again, like obviously breaking that cycle, like it's not really a cycle to break, right? Like that's a very normal biological thing for your body to want to do. And I was just wondering like how you might approach that sort of stuff.
Yeah, so just to clarify, like anybody in the early days of recovery that are binging because their body is needing that extra nutrition?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Thank you. Yeah, no, that's a really good one. To be honest, it's definitely not a cycle to break. I think first and foremost, like empathizing and validating what the client's going through and how distressing and how tough it can be. I almost explain it like a pendulum. I'm like, you've been, this end of the pendulum for so long. It sucks and it's really tricky, but it kind of makes sense that now it's swung. Again, as your dietitian once said to you, like the best thing that we can do right now, as much as it sucks and as much as the ED is not going to want to, is just go back to that regular eating if it ever happens, because that way you're building that body trust, and your brain and your body is not going to have as much of an urgency around food. Like that urgency right now is because you've come off the bout of a period of restriction and it's trying to get what it needs to keep you safe unless it happens again.
Yeah. Again, that brain body trust that you're kind of building, right? And teaching your brain and your body that, hey, like we're not enemies anymore. Like we can, and we can do different things to, cope. No, thank you. I just wanted to kind of touch on that because I don't want people to think like in recovery, if they're kind of experiencing that it's like, there's a cycle to break. And you explained it so perfectly earlier, these different kinds of binging and the cycles and stuff like that. So I thought that was an important one to bring up.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think regular eating is always the best thing to fall back on. Again, a lot easier said than done. Yes. So having, a team around you to help you feel a bit more supported, and that is really helpful.
Yeah, again, just touching on the same thing. I also don't want people to, for those people who might be listening who are experiencing the more emotional side of binging as well, how we talk about this cycle, it's like, you binge, restrict, that may not be applicable to you. So we don't want to, we definitely don't want to generalize binging as that, like just a cause for restriction. And I know that you mentioned that, your main thing after that would be if someone was still experiencing emotional binges despite getting back to a sort of neutral regular eating, would be to go see a psychologist or get some sort of psychological assistance. But is there anything that you could what would you say from a dietetic's point of view, any advice you would give people who are still sort of emotionally engaging in those binges? Like, is there any sort of, cycle that you could work with them on, of any sort of dietetic interventions that you could?
If you have a client with emotional kind of binging, how would you kind of approach that?
That's what I wanted to say. Yeah. Thank you, Kelly.
That's okay.
Yeah. I was following you.
I had lots of words just floating around in my brain. I'm like, I want to use that one, but I also don't know if that's what I'm meant to be saying.
I was totally following what you were saying. I was like, I think this is what you're saying. I'll try and sum it up.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Look, I think from my end, it's like just doing all those checkpoints. Like, are they eating enough? Are they eating adequately? Are they not, restricting even in the slightest? Because even the, teeny tiniest bit of mental restriction can exacerbate that. If all of those are a no, and from a, I guess, food standpoint, everything's pretty well and good, or from a like a regular and adequate eating standpoint, everything's pretty well and good. Again, it's so hard to say, like, I guess, give a blanket answer because it is such a case by case thing, right?
For sure.
Yeah. It really depends on why that person's engaging in those, I guess, behaviors. Like, are they emotionally eating because, or are they engaging in binge eating for emotional reasons? Yeah.
Is it trauma?
I'm trying to think.
Yeah, no, like if I'm following you, like I think you kind of nailed it in saying
like what I'm thinking.
Yeah, but I think it's definitely a point where psychological intervention is really important, right? Because you can do all of these check boxes as a dietitian, but you're not a psychologist. And if this person is emotionally eating because of trauma or, a traumatic experience or, I don't know, a whole plethora of reasons, anxiety, stress. ADHD, ASD, like stress, so many different factors.
Weight stigma.
Weight stigma. Like we really do need psychological intervention there because, does this person need to do trauma therapy? Do they need to do so many different things? So I think you've answered that.
Yeah.
Like I think you did. I like that you said you'd tick off your part, right? But there's only so far you can take it.
Exactly. Yeah. I think I would just make sure everything's good on my end and then just have that discussion with the client. Be like, look, food wise, you're actually doing really great and you should be really proud of yourself for maintaining that through these distressing times. I'm wondering if you might benefit from exploring this further with a psychologist or, even if the person has neurodivergence, maybe like an OT or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, I think, sometimes because you said right back at the very beginning, before you became a dietitian and you're working in a gym and you were getting people come through and you could kind of identify some red flags, but you knew your limitations and so you'd refer them on. I think sometimes when you said that, I was going to react at the time, but when you said that, I was like, wow, because I feel like so many people do work out of their scope of practice. And I feel like very common within a gym environment, like it could have just been, well, do this, do that, like just eat healthy. If you just continue exercising and have this diet, here's a meal plan, then you're going to be all good, right? And I think sadly, we see that a lot. And we also see a lot within the treating space. It's funny. I had this conversation with someone the other day about this idea of a complex case or a complex client or a complicated client. And I was like, well, that concept doesn't really exist. And what the clinician should be saying to the client is, I don't have the skills to be able to, cover that for you. So can I refer you on? Not you're too complex, I can't work with you. It's no, I don't have those skills. But I know somebody who might have those skills. And perhaps, for you, what we're talking about here, a psychologist could be a really good key to the team at this point. We've kind of taken it really, really far and you've done an incredible job. Now it's probably time to refer on and see a psychologist to kind of just get underneath what else is behind this. And I think as clinicians, sometimes I wish more people would refer people on.
Oh, absolutely. And it can just do way more harm than good if you're getting to that sticky end of treatment, right? And you're trying all the things and nothing's working. Yeah. Even just calling the client complex, it's very invalidating.
Oh, absolutely. You're broken almost, right? Like your brain is too complicated for me. It's like, well, no, you just don't have the skills to work with that particular thing.
Yeah. Or maybe you just haven't unpacked a core part of of some core issues going on there might be this massive thing that is being left untreated because they don't have the skills to treat that issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think the reason that I did feel so comfortable referring on was because I already had that whole personal journey through food. And I downloaded all of the meal plans, brought every ebook, talked to, all the fitness influencers on Instagram and downloaded what they eat in the day. And, you name it, I've tried it.
And you what?
Yeah, it didn't fix. What surprise. And it's just the worst feeling in the world, feeling like you're defective. It's so horrible feeling like you don't have enough willpower or self-control. And I just didn't want to inflict that on anybody else.
But that's how the diet industry makes its money. Because it's not the plan, it's you. Actually, this is a really funny anecdote that I've been meaning to say on on the pod. I was okay. I'm going to reveal stuff about myself that I never thought I'd reveal. So I've just
Oh God,
started.
I'm buckling
I've
in.
just started watching Maths.
Oh God.
I know. I'm sorry.
My dad has started watching it and he's like giving me commentary and I'm like, fucking hell.
Okay.
Anyway, continue. Yeah, that's great. Perfect. Good leeway into this convo.
Yeah, feel free to judge me at length. But you know what? It's drama. And
love
I
some
love it.
trashy reality TV.
Oh,
Yeah. Makes me super angry. It's great.
Yeah,
Continue.
It gives me all the power ever.
Funny.
It makes me feel better about myself. No, that's a horrible thing to say. No. So yes, I've been watching Maths, and the platform that I have to watch it on is 9 Now, and obviously you can't skip the ads. Whereas normally I would always skip the ads, and because we live in this world, like so many of them are diet ads, and normally I would just fast forward them and mute them. I don't have to watch them, but because I can't skip them, I have to watch them, or like half watch them. Anyway,
God.
So it was actually the first time I'd actually watched one of these ads. I'm not going to say the brand name because I don't want them to come after me.
You don't want to get sued.
No,
Yeah.
but it was one of those, so whether it's your first time, your second time, or your 15th time, I'm like, hold on. If someone's using it 15 times, maybe it doesn't work. Have we thought of that?
Marketing.
Or no?
I wouldn't pride myself on somebody trying that for 15 times.
Right? I'm like, clear, let's think, like the fact that was chosen to be put in.
Imagine someone coming, like, yeah, no.
Like,
yeah.
you've tried this 15 times and it still doesn't work. Maybe the problem isn't you, wink, wink.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the product or the plan. So if anyone is seeing those ads, look out for that shit, because it is like they're basically telling on themselves. And I was just watching this. So it was just a blatant diet culture just being, they're being very obvious now. They're telling us it doesn't work.
Yeah, like it makes
So
me think of like I have endo, and if I went to my surgeon 15 times for a laparoscopy, I'd probably be like, probably need to see a different surgeon.
Right?
100%. It's with any service, like laser hair removal, or you get a shit haircut, you're probably not going to go back there again.
Or you go and
15
get your car fixed for the same problem 15 times. Maybe he doesn't know what's going on. Maybe it's the mechanic's fault. Get a second opinion. Although don't get a second opinion for a diet thing, because they'll tell you.
No, don't do
No. Oh, I've fully gotten in like a little bit more advocacy at the moment. Like I do it discreetly. I don't put on my socials or anything. But if I see something really like fucked up, I'll email the person or the company. Like one of my friends sent me a screenshot of an email that she got from a gym in our area, obviously going to be remain unnamed. And it was just promoting some real messed up like advice. And I just emailed them, and I wasn't rude. I was just like, hey, someone's just flicked this onto me. If you and your team ever want some upskilling and how to support, people living with an ED or reduce harm, let me know. And they were like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. We didn't need to cause harm. And I was like, yes, you did.
Yeah, you literally did. Like,
I love how polite you were. I would have been like, excuse me, do you know what you're doing? You're killing people. It's like, that's probably why no one listens to me.
No one gets.
It was real passive aggression, though. It was lots.
I love passive.
It was lots of passive aggression underneath. I was like typing. I was like, oh, they're gonna get this.
I'm gonna get this out.
But I think it's needed because people just pretend it's normal, and it's definitely not.
Because it is normal. That's the problem.
Well, yes, the more that people speak out.
Oh, sorry, I get what you're saying. Well,
I know what you're saying.
Yeah, like what is not normal is like, I think it's, like exactly, like it's normal, but it's not normal. Like I think most people will have a story like this, but we just don't speak about it, right? So it's like, because you don't want to call out the diet culture world, do we? Like God forbid.
It's very funny.
Don't bullshit.
Yeah, it's very funny. Ever since starting this podcast, my husband Adam he's started to notice all of this stuff way more now, because I've basically I've told him what to look for, and he now sends me through like, look at this product. It's all of these health claims are ridiculous. There's blatant lies, and I just save all of them. Like, this is going to be a future episode at one point, and I'm like, thank you.
I love that.
So we are making an impact. One person at a time.
Meanwhile, I just get Drew, and he's just like, that sounds fucking shit. I'm like, well, yeah, in a nutshell.
So funny. My partner always tries to stir me up. He's like, I'm thinking of giving this thing a go. What do you
God.
think? And just waits for my response. I'm like, oh.
I'm not engaging with you. Not having this
No.
conversation.
Waving red to a bull, honestly.
Yeah.
So
Oh, it's funny.
So funny.
We could trash on diet culture for hours, and we have. We
Literally.
will keep doing it, but
every episode. Literally. But anyway, back.
This is a side note, actually. Of one thing I really want to do an episode on is like how we got here, of like all of the terrible things in like the 90s and the 2000s of why we're all so fucked up. Like, and I've actually started making a list in my phone, like America's Next Top Model, Joan Rivers, that fucking awful show from Channel 4 in the UK, Super Size versus Super Skinny.
Super Size versus Super Skinny.
Like
all of
the Biggest Loser.
Kate Moss and all her shit.
Bikini body challenges.
All of that. I'm like, this is going to have to be a series then.
I remember one influencer I used to follow said that, and like I bought her plans and stuff, that lettuce had too much sugar. So you like don't eat lettuce. Yeah. Like, bro, lettuce is literally like, are you joking?
Water.
Or carrot. Don't eat carrot either. Too much sugar. If you're going to choose vegetables, you got to choose, the greens, because like, bro, lettuce is green. No, it's too light green, It's got to be the dark green. Anyway,
people can say anything these days. Anyway, so
with the internet. Anyway, so bringing us back to could you tell us a little bit about Sweet Spot Health and how does your lived experience inform your approach to care? You've kind of answered it in a little bit, but I thought if we could just,
devote an entire question
wrap it up nicely with a bow.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So Sweet Spot Health, it was always, to be honest, like when it was Maddi Parsons Nutrition, it was very much the same approach. It's just new names, new formalities, so to speak. Our approach is definitely human-centered. So we really want to put our clients like at the center of our care, as you said before, Ash, like that client-centered care approach, which I think is so needed and definitely not always the case, unfortunately, particularly in dietetics. So we just really wanted to change that, and we wanted to inject a whole lot more humanness. Like with my neurodivergence, I always feel like growing up, as I sort of said before, I always felt like a bit of the odd one out, a bit different. I really like humor, and I use humor a lot in sort of my day-to-day, and I just wanted to do more of that, obviously where appropriate, like not in an inappropriate format, but I just want to make people feel like a whole lot more comfortable when deciding to embark in treatment, because it can be really freaking scary. So I guess that's a massive thing that we're trying to do at Sweet Spot Health. And as I said, we've got 2 team members at the moment, and they're very much the same. I'm very particular with who I bring on for that reason. I don't want anyone to feel like they don't get the same experience with me as they would someone else. But our whole thing is just empowering people to develop, a sustainable way to care for their health. We don't want to, give them the quick fixes or the things that aren't going to last to keep them coming through our door. Like I always say to my clients in the nicest way possible, like, I want you to have the skills and the tools to hopefully one day not have to come back here. So, absolutely. That's what we're all about.
Yeah.
I love it. It's the goal.
Yeah, absolutely the goal. And can you also tell us a little bit about your podcast? So it's called We Don't Know Yet. But can you tell us a little bit about where that started and what it's all about? Plug. This is your opportunity to plug.
It's very, thank you. Look, it's a bit of a random story, to be honest. So I run the podcast with my friend Zeb. He is an osteopath. So he's got, his Instagram handle is Osteo with Zeb. So long story short, he's from Melbourne. Him and his partner, Gabby, moved up to Sydney a year or two ago, and we met at a local run club. So I actually made friends with Zeb prior to meeting Gabby, but now we're all just like, we've got a few other friends, and we're all like a big happy family. So we're at a dinner party once, and Zeb and I, we'd had a few drinks at this point, I'm not going to lie. Zeb's like, I've always wanted to start a podcast. I was like, yeah, me too. And he's like, but I don't want to start it by myself. I was like, me either. And then we're like, should we? And then we're kind of just chatting that night about what we could call it. And then jokingly, I was like, why don't we just call it like We Don't Know Yet? Because we had no idea what to call it. And then it stuck, which is cool.
That name. It's such a cool name.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess it does transcend quite nicely into what the pod is all about. So we're both from very different spaces in like the allied healthcare industry or space. But we both of our, I guess, common values is like it is okay not to know all of the things. And I think that's something that a lot of care practitioners struggle with, like that almost like pressure to feel like they have to know everything and be the best at everything. And like, I guess we're trying to challenge that. We're both pretty, early on into our careers, we're being like, we actually don't. Like, it's okay to admit if you don't know something. And that's what the pod's all about. So we try and talk to people from all different health disciplines or areas of health as well, just to unpack some of like different health topics and chat about the biggest myths and misconceptions, just to make health a little bit more accessible and a little bit more interesting. Because as I'm sure you guys know, sometimes it can be a little bit boring.
Yeah, no, I love that. And it links into what we were kind of talking about earlier. Like, it is okay to say, I don't know. And then it's such a learning opportunity. Like, if you don't know something, you then get to learn about it. Like, and I love that. Even from my clients, like, if I don't know something, like, I can just ask them, like, and I feel like so many clinicians just shy away from just asking your client. Like, they can tell you from their own lived experience, and that's how, and then you can expand on that, sure. But like, I love that. Love it.
Yeah. Same.
Yeah. Even in work, like if one of my clients is presenting with something that I'm not sure about, like I'll be very transparent. I'm like, oh, I'd love to like go away and actually do a bit more research and sort of come up with some things that we can chat about next time if that's okay. And I've never not had anybody say like no.
Yeah, no, I this is a bit of a, against intimate detail, but I have interstitial cystitis, and I remember trying to find a dietitian to kind of help me out with it a little bit, and because I was kind of exhausted a lot of other treatment options and thought I'd explore that kind of route. Anyway, I went to my normal dietitian that I go to all the time, not like he's just a general dietitian, and I love him, he's incredible. But I just said to him, like, do you know anyone that can work with interstitial cystitis? Because I'm kind of coming up short. Like, can you? And he's just like, look, I'll be completely honest with you. I don't know a lot about it. He goes, but leave it with me. I can get you some recommendations, or if you trust me, like I can learn about it and get back to you. And I was just like, yeah, I would love to not change dietitians. Like I would love to just stay with you. And so he went away, did his research, came back, and he's been incredible with it. Like, he's learned so much about it. And like, I just felt so, I guess, safe in that. Like, he's not pretending, so he's not going to just take my money and like run with it and just tell me, willy-nilly what to do. It was like, no, I'll go and explore some options and I'll come back to you. And I just think it's such an incredible, like I trusted him before that, but it just made me trust him so much more after as well. So I think that's an incredible, incredible ethos.
I love that.
Yeah.
Love it. Oh,
great. What a great response.
Yeah.
I didn't, and I think that's the fear sometimes as a clinician, right? You're kind of like, oh, if I tell them I don't know, they're going to think that I'm, like not a professional. They're going to think that they're not going to want to come back. The opposite is so true. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah. And Dad's the same. Like he obviously works a whole lot more in like the musculoskeletal and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. Actually didn't know what an osteo did until we became friends, because they're not really big in Sydney. Apparently they're huge in Melbourne.
Sure. They're really popular in the, like, I don't know, like obviously I don't know what area Zeb works in, but it's really popular in the newborn space. Yeah, I was looking at taking my daughter when she was little to an osteopath, because they can help with a lot of like, when babies are born, it's kind of like trauma on their body. Like it's not a very, like people like natural birthing people are going to come for me, but it's not really a natural process. Like they're kind of contorted a little bit. So I think it's really popular to kind of like I don't really know what an osteopath does either, to be honest with you, but like it helped Blake.
Yeah. As I was saying, coming back to that, obviously in the musculoskeletal system, I lost my train of thought too. I was like, what was I saying with this? Like in the musculoskeletal system, like he always says point blank, like there's so much to know. Like I'll always be so upfront if I don't know something.
Love it.
Which I think is important.
I completely agree. Yeah.
100%.
Such a trusting thing. Yeah. Yeah. Love it.
Well,
coming for a home landing here, Ash.
I am. I always have to do it, unfortunately.
Bring us home.
I don't want to, but I have to. We always like to end on sort of a nice wrapping question, depending on the guest, but it always, especially if someone has a lived experience, we always love to hear about what being recovered looks like to you now, because we don't really believe in sort of one definition of being recovered. We think it looks different for everybody, because there's recovery maintenance, which we've discussed at length on this podcast, but more like, what does it look like for you?
As an individual.
Yeah, as an individual.
Yeah, I love that question. I feel like I can give you a big TED talk on it, right? I'll try and condense it. Life is just so much better. Like, I don't even know how else to sort of articulate it, right? Like, my body looks completely different, but I'm the most confident that I've ever been. Like, obviously there are days that are tough. Everybody goes through them, but on the whole, I'm a whole lot more confident around my body than I have ever been. Food just tastes amazing. Like, food is life, right? And food is the best. And like all the memories and social outings and experiences that accompany that most of the time, like, life is just better. Mental space, mental clarity, like not having, the constant acrobatics around what or what not to eat. And you just feel a lot more content, if I were to, I guess, condense it.
Yeah. The freedom of the only question you need to ask is, what do I want to eat today? Not what can I eat? How can I eat it? Of course,
how do I navigate this?
Yeah. It's one of those, it's such a nice freeing question. Or I'm going to eat that because I like it, not because it fits my macros, not because, I'm allowed to, or, man, it's all of that diet talk that we just get fed. No, none of that. I want it, so I'm going to eat it. Simple.
Love it.
Spontaneous, gelatos with friends. You're like, yeah, that sounds great. I'll come.
Yeah, 100%. I think when you said, what did you say at the very beginning of that question? You're like, like it's just great. I think you said something along those lines. And like, I feel like just your expression, I wish that everyone could just see your face when you said that. Because as soon as you said that to me, you just explained it all. Like, you didn't even, like, it's like you just completely encapsulated it in like one sentence, really.
My words, really wording. I was like, it's just better.
Like it was just, I loved it. Like, you completely summed it up. Like, it just the most simple way, and I love that. I love it.
Amazing. Thank you.
It has been such a pleasure talking to you, Maddi. We have such a really interesting conversation full of twists and turns, because we love that. We always ended up rounding back to the point, which I love, because sometimes when I've been editing this podcast, I'm like, we started a conversation and then we never answered the question. But this is like, everything was wrapped up in a neat little bow. I loved it.
Yay.
Mate, I think it's a skill that I've had to learn over time. I'm like, I have a point and I'm coming back.
Well, look, I'm still,
you made my
still
editing job very easy.
No, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on, guys. And it's been really nice talking about my experience and the work that we do. And look, I hope anyone listening out there, even one person, for them to relate to something that I've said is amazing.
100%. And this is the part where you get to plug all your socials. Where can we find you? Go follow her right now. All the links will be in the show notes, but go for it. This is your opportunity to plug.
I'm just trying to think. Website, sweetspothealth.co, no M at the end, just .co. And on Instagram, that's probably where we're the most active. It's Sweet Spot Health as well. Awesome. We're a little bit on TikTok. It's hard to do the whole TikTok-y thing. I can't really get there yet. Yeah. But Instagram and website.
I don't know TikTok either, so.
I don't use TikTok. I can't do it. Yeah.
It stresses me too much.
And your podcast as well. Where can they find you on that?
We are on Spotify and YouTube, and we also have an Instagram page, which is We Don't Know Yet Pod. We Don't Know Yet .pod. Zeb and I always get this mixed up. We're like, where is the dot? We Don't Know Yet .pod.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, you don't need to search it because it will be in the show notes, and you can go there right now and click it and then go follow. So it's going to be great.
Yeah. Now.
Right now. Unless you're driving.
Thank you.
Unless you're driving. Love that addition.
Oh, thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, Maddi.
Thank you so much, Maddi. That's all for today's podcast. Thank you so much for listening. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. And if you like what you're hearing, please give us a 5-star review. It really helps us out. Follow us on Instagram at pavewithgoldpod. Send us an email at pavewithgoldpod@gmail.com or visit our website, pavewithgoldpodcast.com. All of those links will be in the show notes along with extra resources and where you can find Maddi. Until next time, stay safe and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye.
Bye.
This podcast is general in nature and has not taken your personal circumstances or medical history into account. We are here to share our own experiences and the things that we have found helpful throughout our own personal recovery journeys. Please remember that each person's journey and circumstances are different, and not all of the information contained in this podcast may be relatable to you. It's important you consult your own GP or recovery team to seek out tailored advice before making any important decisions relating to your own health and recovery process. If you have found any of the content in this episode distressing, please contact your care team or a medical professional. If you or someone you know is in crisis and needs help now, please contact emergency services in your region immediately.